There's a new documentary that I was watching today called MLK FBI. It premiered on Martin Luther King's actual birthday. It's on streaming platforms. And joining me right now is one of the creators of this documentary, which is chilling because I have a lot of questions about this. Let me welcome Mr. Sam Pollard. Welcome to the Karen Hunter Show.
Thank you very much, Karen.
Thanks for joining us. Sina's here as well, Sina Ghaznavi. I was talking with Dr. Greg Carr about the sealing, the 75-year sealing of the King documents. And it seems like it has been unearthed early, like there's a lot that's happening. And as I'm watching this documentary, I am stunned at the level of surveillance of King, who by all reports was a Christian minister who preached nonviolence, who wanted justice and equality. What made him, in the FBI's words, the most dangerous Negro in America, who they needed to use all of their resources to destroy? Those are their words. What made him that?
Well, the fact that at the March on Washington, he was able to galvanize so many people and basically say, we want equal rights. We want a fair share of the American pie. We don't want to be treated as second-class citizens anymore. And for J. Edgar Hoover, who was, to me, a stand-in for much of white America at that time, that was like, are these black people crazy? Or as they used the term back then, those Negroes, aren't they happy? They come into our communities, they do our housework, they take care of our kids, they go back to their communities. We don't let them, specifically in the South, we don't let them sit in the front of the bus, we don't let them walk into our stores, they can't drink from white water fountains. What's the problem? There's no racial problems in America. So why is this man, getting people to rise up? So as far as they were concerned, even though he was a nonviolent activist, he was a radical. He was challenging the status quo of America, to be to be a good American was to be free, white, and 21.
How did you come to this, Sam Pollard? Give me your background. What is it? What is your expertise in this? What is your background?
Well, I've been in the documentary business for many, many years. First as an editor at the young age of 25 years old, and then, as a documentary producer, first time in 1987 on the seminal series Eyes on the Prize 2. And since that time, I've gone back and forth between, producing and editing documentaries and editing feature films for people like Spike Lee and Ernest Dickerson. And then probably in the last 5 years, I've done more directing. Sammy Davis, I've Got to Be Me, August Wilson, The Ground on Which I Stand, Slavery by Another Name, and now this film, MLK, FBI.
Slavery by Another Name, that is the book of Negroes. Is that the book of Negroes?
Yeah, that's the book written by Doug Blackman that looked at
the
fact that even after Reconstruction, Black people were being treated like slaves.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
Sam, so why this? Why MLK FBI? I was just talking with a bunch of friends of mine about COINTELPRO, and as I'm watching this documentary and the dossier that they had on King and Stokely Carmichael, who they named by name, and Malcolm, and like everybody was being surveilled and criticized and scrutinized, and in my opinion, set up. How does this relate to today? There was a list I read recently, a couple of years ago, since the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement and other types of organizations like that there are lists of people being surveilled or watched. There's a watch list of activists today by this FBI. And before King, after World War II, there was also a list of Black people being surveilled and studied by the FBI. What has changed? It goes as far back
as Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey.
Thank you. Yes.
FBI. I mean, listen, anytime, Karen, anytime anybody who seems to challenge the notion now of American democracy, they are considered a threat, because they're going to upend the notion of American democracy people think it is. So, it's not surprising that, I think that the reason that this film is resonating so well today is because many of the things the FBI was doing back in the 60s with COINTELPRO, having informants, in these organizations, they're still doing it today. You know that, and I know. The idea that even back then, when someone said to Dr. King on the talk show, why don't you feel your peaceful protesters are causing the riots in the city? Didn't we hear that same dialogue about the Black Lives Matter movement this past summer? Isn't the Black Lives Matter movement causing all these riots in the cities? You know, the idea that people think that, you know, communism is going to destroy America. We're hearing it today. We heard it in this past 6 months with Trump saying socialist, you remember the term here, socialist Democrats are going to take over this country. They're going to destroy our suburbs. I mean, these dog whistles that we heard in the 60s are still so relevant today, which even though America has made some advances, there's still a level of hypocrisy that this country has held on to because they don't want to come to grips that there is systemic racism in America.
866-801-8255. The great Sam Pollard is here. The documentary is MLK FBI. It will piss you off to watch it. You know, you had me mad watching this because I'm like, how do we end this? You know, if you could destroy Martin Luther King and try to embarrass him and try to destroy his reputation when all he wanted was freedom and equality, what hope do any of us have who are sitting in this seat fighting for the same things?
It makes you feel a little pessimistic at times, but you know, and I know that, you know, you got to keep that fight going. I mean, Dr. King got battered and bruised near the end, you know, before the assassination, but he was still gung-ho. I mean, think of it this way. Here he comes out against in 67, he does this speech at Riverside Church, basically saying America should not be in Vietnam. Dr. King had to know that was going to sever his ties with the Johnson administration. And you heard, I don't know if you remember, but in the film, he got backlash from even the civil rights community.
Yeah.
Dr. King, have you lost your mind? How come you're changing your agenda? You know, I mean, he was focused on making change, not just for Black people, but for all people, for all humanity, not just for racially, but economically and socially. I mean, this man was a pioneer. And so, but that makes him a threat. I mean, that makes him, he's as much of a threat as Malcolm X was a threat, as Stokely was a threat, as Angela Davis was a threat, as Bobby Seale, Huey Newton, Eldridge Cleaver, because anytime anybody stands up and say America's not doing the right thing, people want to take you down. Look what happened when Colin Kaepernick just knelt on one knee. You know, knelt on one knee. He didn't even do anything other than kneel.
There was a poignant moment for me, Andrew Young, saying that King said that they were insane. There was an insanity to doing this. And then he goes on to talk about the church and the deep, unabiding faith that many people had. And as I was listening to Andrew Young talk about, you know, these young people out in them streets, literally putting their bodies on the line with no guns, nothing, no power, no vote, but fighting. And it was the church that brought them together. It was their faith in God that they would get to the promised land, you know. And I was watching this saying, we don't have that same depth of faith today in terms of Black people. That church was central. It was the central organizing mechanism. It was the central key philosophy. Black people believed in that Bible. And I don't see that today. Mr. Pollard, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you're right, but I think a lot of it has to do with the world has changed so much. You know, the world has changed. I mean, think of it this way: the church, the Black church, was a central part of the Black community all around the country. If you went to, you know, South Central Los Angeles, you went up to Harlem, you went to Chicago, you went to Atlanta. Back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, the Black church was central. So on Sundays, Black people would congregate at the church. Now, here's what happened. Now, our communities all became obliterated with integration. These are the pros and cons of integration. They became obliterated with integration. So the fracturing of our community meant that we spread out all over the country. You know, we don't stay, the doctors, the lawyers, they don't stay in the community as much. And those were the people that were galvanized to go to the church on Sunday. So it doesn't surprise me that the church isn't the central sort of, you know, anchor anymore of our community because we've spread out so much. And also the other thing to remember, you know, I grew up in New York City and I went to church every Sunday, but I didn't send my kids to church because I didn't have that same kind of mindset that my mother and father had, you know. So it's changed, the world's changed. And in some ways, that notion of the church being sort of this anchor for the community is very different now.
Sam, I want to know, we have a new administration. Merrick Garland is going to be the Attorney General, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, all of these things. I know there's not going to be a magical switch that gets flipped, but do you have hope of what is one reform that you would like to see? Maybe it's from the administration, maybe it's Merrick Garland doing something with the FBI that kind of changes the way they prioritize investigations. What do you think would be the best maybe outcome in this first year of the administration?
You know, it's not going to happen in the first year. Here's something America's got to come to grips with. Every time a black person is shot, and we all know this, and you have these body cams now where you see black people being shot by the police for no reason at all, and then some investigation happens in the state attorney general's office, right? You know, and then we hear 4 or 5 weeks later, well, there was no reason to indict this police officer.
Yeah.
Until the federal government steps in and says, we have to do something to stop this kind of bloodshed, you know, America's not going to change. Listen, I've been around a long time. I was 14 years old, 18 years old when Dr. King was assassinated. I've seen America go through lots of changes. You know, I like to be optimistic, and I'm hoping that the Biden administration, well, I don't hope that. I know they're going to be better than the past administration. That I know. The question is, will they be taking some giant steps that make those of us in our community feel they really care about us?
Well, I heard Biden say yesterday that systemic racism and injustice was one of the chief things that he wanted to tackle. I heard him out of his mouth use those words, and I was like, okay.
Never heard the president say that at the inaugural address, right? That's
right. So I was like, okay, but words are words. You know, you've seen the 4 little girls because you documented it. The 4 little girls that were killed in the bombing.
Yeah.
You know, Eye on the Prize is one of the seminal pieces of documentary work that for many of us, that was the first place that I ever saw water hoses and dogs being sick. My mother talked about it growing up in Augusta, but I physically saw it. My father would make me watch it every January season, you know, because Eye on the Prize was on Channel 13 in the New York tri-state area, and we got to watch it for free, and I was forced to watch it. So my indoctrination into this work that you did was early. But today we're misinformed, we're ignorant, we're disconnected, you know, we're horrified at the same time. We're distracted by all of the entertainment that we have at the click of a finger. We don't have the longevity in terms of the stamina to continue to fight. I just wonder, you know, how long, and I hear you, because you said you've been around 18 when King, that was 68. I'm not going to do the math, but you know some things that many of us, because you have institutional knowledge. What do you see over the horizon or around the corner for this country?
Here's what should happen. All of these films and all these books about our history, which is American history, which people sometimes don't understand, the young people, our people, white people, they need to learn this history. They need to learn that American history was not George Washington or Lincoln or, you know, just the Great Depression, but it included lots of black people's stories. You know, and these films have to be brought to the communities. So young people from 9, 10, 11, 12 years old can start to understand this history. And maybe not repeat what their ancestors have repeated. Because you and I know, and Selena knows, the history is constantly repeated. Things happen time and time again. I mean, when we saw what happened on January 6th in Washington, D.C., that wasn't an aberration. That wasn't something that was like, oh my God, that can happen in America. People have been doing that, attacking communities, destroying things if they can't have their way in this country for hundreds of years, you know. And people need to know that this is something that has happened before, and the only way you can change it is to educate people, you know, and to try to have people have dialogue, because the notion of us against them is what keeps us at this great divide.
Sam Pollard is with us, great documentarian. The film is MLK FBI. I was talking this week about the sealed records until 2027. What's not in this documentary that you think is in the sealed documents that will be released in 5 years? What don't we know?
Here's my hope. You know, unless the FBI does some really specific scrubbing of these tapes that they recorded, I personally don't care about any of this, whatever, whatever sexual stuff that may be there. I have no use for that. What I would be interested in, if they kept on these tapes, any kind of discussion Dr. King might have had with Ralph Abernathy or Andy Young or Dorothy Cotton or Fred Shuttlesworth or James Bevel, anybody, if they were talking about any strategies that they had when they went to Birmingham, when they went to Albany, when they went to, Selma, when they went to Chicago, where King failed, if they had those kind of discussions, I would be interested. You're from Augusta, Georgia, huh?
My mother is. My mother's from Augusta.
My mother's from Macon, Georgia.
I love it. We're all cousins, and as far as I'm concerned, we're all family. And as I'm watching this too, the lessons are very clear. But what can we do to put pressure on the next J. Edgar Hoover? Because he had unchecked power. He wrecked a whole lot of lives. And I listened to James Comey discussed it, actually, because in many ways I blame him for Trump, and he has the audacity to go to Howard and teach, and now he's out here trying to, I guess, reclaim his image. But dude, you're just as responsible for the destruction of American democracy as anybody else. And the COINTELPRO model is still in existence in the FBI, which how do we dismantle that?
Well, listen, if we want to do it, as they say, the democratic way, we have to be sending letters and calling our Congress people to basically say the FBI needs to be investigated. They're supposed to be American police force, but they're obviously, and I know they're doing some dastardly things, both on the left in terms of loves of left-wing radicals, and those on the right, the white supremacists. They're doing some dastardly things. And even though, this is my take, Karen, Comey says that part was the darkest part of the FBI's history. I bet there's other dark parts.
I was thinking the same thing. I was like, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. It's just what we know.
That's exactly right. Because ask yourself the question, if they were surveilling Dr. King for 24/7, as Chuck Knox, the former FBI agent, says in the film, anytime King was going to another city, they had all hands on deck. How come they were not aware of someone with a gun going to assassinate King at the Lorraine Motel? Just doesn't make sense. Either they turned a blind eye, as someone said to me earlier today, or they were actively involved in the assassination.
What would you think? All right, you don't have to answer that.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Last question to you.
Well, I guess maybe it's a little bit more of a funny question because, as a Middle Eastern kid, we always talk about the CIA growing up. Who do you think has more blood on their hands, the FBI or the CIA?
CIA, man.
Oh, all right, good to know. That makes me feel a little bit better.
Go back to 1952. When did they put the Shah of Iran in place?
We were just talking about that last week.
Mossadegh, 53. Yeah, man. All right.
Oh, 53. Ooh, man. I mean, CIA has supported dictators as long as this country's, since the end of World War II. Why? Money, oil.